thank you so much, and we appreciate the opportunity to be a presenter today for the PHCC Educational Foundation. It's on a very interesting and really hot topic, especially given many of the states now moving to legalize marijuana or create marijuana as a prescription medication. Lots of our calls here from our clients with concerns and questions, unfortunately, deal with a lot of these types of issues in terms of employees being under the influence, smelling of alcohol, or these kinds of things. So it's an important topic and one that needs to be addressed. A little bit about SESCO. We were founded in 1945. We're into our 4th generation. We have a number of HR consultants on staff as well as employment attorneys. We have service agreements available. If any of the callers are with QSC or a member of QSC, you can contact us at no charge under a program that we've developed for them. So as you have questions regarding these issues or concerns, feel free to call us. The remainder of the members of PHCC, our commitment to the group has been, if you have questions, feel free to call us. I've provided to you our telephone number, email address, and be happy at no charge to answer any questions that you may have regarding this particular topic. Normally we don't put disclaimers on our PowerPoint slides, but you'll see a disclaimer in front of you. The reason is that, as stated earlier, drug testing is a highly technical topic for employers. The good news is that the federal and state governments support drug testing as long as you have good compliant policy in place. Federal regulations are pretty simple in terms of the Drug-Free Workplace Act. Many of you all may be familiar with that act. If you're not, you'll hear a little bit about this in the presentation. But many of your workers' comp carriers will give you a reduction on your workers' comp if you develop a policy along the lines of or compliant with the Drug-Free Workplace Act. From a federal standpoint, that's about it that we need to be concerned with. Depending on what state you operate, states again are pro drug testing in the workplace. However, many states have issued their own specific state regulations in terms of what maybe even drugs can be tested for, how they may be tested, where they may be tested for, etc. So just be aware of, if you Google or find a substance use policy from a friend or a neighbor, one's floating around, be very careful about adopting that without some sort of review from us or someone else who is knowledgeable. Today, we're going to cover the facts about drug use. We're going to cover a number of statistics, realities, if you will, that employers face with illegal drug use or alcohol use in the workplace. How to build a policy that maybe works for you, maybe some do's and don'ts as well, and then implementing from there the policy. I can tell you, again, referencing just working here for almost 30 years and talking with clients daily on day-to-day employment issues, that if you do not have a drug-free or substance abuse workplace policy, we strongly recommend one. A good policy will accomplish two major things for your organization. It certainly will send a message that alcohol and drug use in the workplace is prohibited. And it also may encourage employees who have problems with alcohol and other drugs to seek help. Let's talk about these for a minute. The first one, sending a clear message that alcohol and drug use in the workplace is prohibited. You've probably even seen yourself that some businesses will put on their door, maybe their front door to their business or office, maybe into the human resource office or otherwise, that the organization, there's a posting that the organization is drug-free and conducts test of applicants, and that deters folks from applying who are users or abusers who cannot pass a test. On the other hand, true story, I've got a friend, he's also a client. He owns and operates a large box plant. I'm not going to tell you which one, but he doesn't do any drug testing. And he has a very transient workforce. He has basically low wages. He has to put up with that type of transient workforce. And in the region, those individuals who use drugs, abuse drugs, etc., they know who the employers are who don't test, and that's that will encourage those types of applicants to show up. So it will send a clear message to your current employees as well as applicants that drug use is not welcome in our organization. In terms of what a policy would try to address, certainly protecting the health and safety of all employees is paramount. Of course, customers and the public. Many of you, if not most all, are out in the public driving vehicles, or your employees are driving vehicles, etc. So even more versus a manufacturing plant or a single site operation, even more for you all, the importance of having a drug-free workplace policy and trying to safeguard customers and the public. You'll see some statistics here in a minute, but abusers, users tend to be those who steal from you. So you will reduce theft and destruction of your company property, your trucks, your tools, equipment, etc. Certainly you will have a higher quality of service, your integrity and reputation. We certainly want to avoid some sort of accident, serious injury, maybe even a death of someone out on the road or a customer, etc., that hits the paper. We certainly want to maintain a good reputation and avoid those kinds of significant issues. Not on your slide, but a couple of other things in terms of what a policy will do for you. You'll have less turnover, meaning reduced recruitment cost. You should have higher morale. There's nothing more negative that will affect morale than employees know that there is someone who is under the influence or a user that they're working with or next to, and employees don't like it. Of course, you'll have better productivity. You'll also reduce conflict in the workplace and even workplace violence. There are statistics surrounding workplace violence that those who become violent typically are users or abusers. And of course, as we'll talk extensively here in a minute, it should reduce your health insurance and certainly your workers' comp costs. So the problem of drugs and alcohol in the workplace, I'm going to walk through several statistics here, but the current statistics are telling us that employers are losing approximately $100 billion a year through lost productivity. You'll see $81.6 billion due to premature death and illness. Of course, absenteeism, as we talked about, healthcare expenses, workers' compensation. 38 to 50% of all workers' compensation claims are normally related to substance abuse in the workplace. Also, substance abusers file 3 to 5 times as many workers' comp claims. Those folks are good about getting hired on, and within the first day or week or even month, they're hurt. Now they're at home on the couch getting their 66%, and it's a real issue for employers. These folks tend to know how to abuse the system. Medical costs, substance abusers incur about 300% higher medical costs than non-abusers. Absenteeism is stated. These folks tend to miss 8 or more days per year on average. Lost productivity, employee turnover, as we stated. So it's a real cost to the employer in terms of allowing or not preventing substance abuse in the workplace. Some other realities that will open your eyes to why you may want to develop and implement an effective policy. 73% of users are employed. They need the money and they need to buy their drugs or alcohol. So most of your users are employed. They're not on the corner street, panhandling. They're in the workplace. Almost 1 in 10 employees has a substance abuse problem, meaning an addiction. In addition to that, that's not on your slide, but in addition to that, the statistics tell us 2 to 3 out of 10 or 20 to 30% of your employees are not necessarily addicted, but have ongoing usage challenges. 24% of workers admitted to drinking during the workday at least once in the past year. 15% of workers report using alcohol or being impaired on the job in the past 10 years. Of course, we in the U.S. feed the worldwide epidemic. 60% of production is consumed in the U.S. 1 in 4 between the ages of 18 and 35 have used illegal drugs. This is a scary one. About 1/3 of employees know of the illegal sale of drugs in the workplace. %47 of industrial injuries are directly related to alcohol abuse or alcoholism. And as I stated earlier, drug users seek employment or they target employers who do not conduct pre-employment drug screening, etc. So it's a real issue. I'm sure you have folks in your organization who are regular drinkers in the evening, maybe on the weekend, maybe smoke their marijuana or a pot on the weekend. Most employers try not to deal with those kinds of challenges, but that's one of the challenges that employers may deal with indirectly in implementing such a policy, because some of these substances will remain in the employee system. So that becomes the push or shove in terms of, do we want to develop a policy? Do we want to implement a policy? Many business owners will tell us, look, I really don't care what an employee does after hours. I don't care what they do on the weekends. That's their time. However, when they're at work, that they need to be clear, coherent. They need to be free from alcohol and drugs. And thus that gets to be a blurred line because, again, some of these substances will stay in your system for an extended period of time, as we all know. A couple of additional disadvantages that are not on your slide in terms of developing a drug-free workplace policy. The first is the cost. Although if you look at the cost over a period of time, it should save you significant time, resources, money in developing a policy versus not. But there is a cost, obviously, to testing, and certainly the type of testing that we implement in terms of what we're testing for and potentially how often. So there is a cost to the policy. Number two is, and I'll talk about this in a minute in terms of the type of testing you want to consider, is be careful what you ask for, because you probably have a certain percentage based on the statistics here within your workforce that will probably fail a drug test. And in fact, this slide at the bottom, you will see the bullet point circumstances in which testing will occur. And the first question there is random. Literally, I had a client last year, a call, and it was a multi-site automotive dealership up and down the East Coast. And the owner called and said, Bill, I want to take this drug testing seriously. You know, we've had some issues in the workplace, and I'm going to take a zero tolerance position on this. Can you help me build a policy? And I said, sure. So we started building a policy, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And he said, well, Bill, you know what I'm going to do? He said, I'm going to implement random testing. I'm going to test so many employees each week. I'm going to send a serious message, and I'm going to get rid of this problem in my workplace. Of course, we talked about the pros and cons of random testing. Literally after the first month, the owner called me and he said, Bill, he said, we got a problem. I said, what's that? And he said, well, I did my random testing and it worked. And I said, well, what's the problem? And he says, well, my 30-year right-hand man, general manager, tested positive for cocaine. And I said, okay, what's the problem? And he said, how do I keep him? So in terms of implementing specifically a random testing policy, think through that. You need to think through it very seriously. I'm not pro or negative against that, but that there may be some practical results that may not be real easy to deal with. So that's something to think about in terms of your policy. Considerations for drug policy, who will be subjected. There's no question that we would think that you should not, quote, legally discriminate. You could determine classes of employees that you wanted to test. For example, you may decide that you don't want to implement a drug testing for an internal administrative group, accounting, HR, or marketing group, but we do want to implement a drug testing policy, substance use policy for our technicians. You could do that. I don't necessarily like it, particularly in smaller employers, because one group feels pitted against the other. It's probably best to do it across the board, but you could determine what class or what job titles or those who are responsible for certain job duties would be tested and those not. What conduct is prohibited? Drinking, drugging, being impaired, failing to disclose that they may be impaired, even failing to submit to a drug test as requested. All of those things should be in your policy. What are the consequences for engaging in prohibited conduct? Consequences for pre-employment testing typically results in not hiring that individual, but I can't tell you how many times that a client has called, stated that they had the perfect candidate, perfect experience, perfect resume, skills and abilities. They failed the drug test. They want to give them 15 days or 30 days to clean up their act, to come back and complete the application process over. Certainly you can do that, but again, be careful what you ask for. The repetitiveness, recidivism of this behavior is very high. The other thing on consequences for engaging in prohibited conduct, let's say that you have in your policy a post-accident drug test, which we recommend. It's a reportable accident and you want to do a drug test. And that employee fails the drug test, or frankly any current employee who fails any type of drug test, reasonable suspicion or otherwise. One thing that we recommend, it sounds tough, it sounds hard, it sounds cold, but one thing that we do recommend as a firm with your policy is zero tolerance. Again, the repetitive nature of these individuals who use, particularly those who are addicted or use, or even casual users, typically do it again. Second, third, fourth chances are costly to you in terms of time off the job. It may engage family medical leave and other employment regulations such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, these employees may become protected. And the statistics are about 89 to 90%, 9 out of 10 times, they're going to get caught, not caught, but they're going to use again. Again, based on client calls and experience, the clients will call and say, look, what do you think about this? And we'll normally tell them our thought in terms of zero tolerance, and I can't tell you how often we've had, well, we're going to give them a 30-day reprieve if they go to some sort of rehabilitation program and prove that they successfully completed the rehabilitation program. We're going to give them a 1 strike or a 2 strike. They can come back if they get help. And more times than not, the client's calling, with that same concern or issue again. Periods in which the prohibitions may apply, in terms of if you have, 1 strike, a 2 strike type of program, how does that work? And then probably most importantly, when are we testing and what are we going to test for? We'll talk about those in detail. Testing procedures. Who are we going to use? We're going to use the nearest local doc in the box. Are we going to use the emergency room? We're going to use some sort of occupational therapist, etc. But identify a good, competent professional. And then understand what the effects of drugs and alcohol are and the signs and symptoms. We have a section in the program that talks about supervisory training. We're not going to turn your managers or supervisors into experts, but they need to be able to recognize these signs and symptoms so that we can implement a reasonable suspicion test for employees. The first and most common is pre-employment drug testing. Strongly recommended. You don't want to hire someone and then find out later that they've got an issue or a problem. Stop it up front. Send a strong message. One thought here when I was preparing, and I didn't find any specific research on it, but it was a thought that I had as I researched for this program. As I stated earlier, in past days, in past years, you would typically see a sign or a placard on a company door or office door or on the application itself, or maybe even in a job ad, whatever it might be, is that this organization, our company, we do pre-employment drug testing. So as to prevent the whole process of receiving applications, reviewing applications, maybe doing an interview or two prior to doing a substance abuse exam. I'm kind of indifferent on that. In my research, and if you want to Google, and you probably are familiar with some of this yourself, these employees who are regular users can go online, or they can obtain certain products to mask their use. And therefore, if they know a company is doing pre-employment drug testing, they can prepare for that. So again, I'm a little indifferent, and I'm thinking now that maybe we would want to not state that we do that type of testing, but that we announce it at the appropriate time so that we can ensure that the test will be based on reality, and that the applicant didn't prepare for the test ahead of time. Normally, as part of the pre-employment process, employers are required to pay the drug test. I've gotten the calls from clients again. Well, Bill, this employee told me that they could pass the substance abuse test. They failed it. I paid for the test. I want to bill them for it. Most states prohibit that, but contact us and we can help you through any kind of state regulations as we talked about. To reduce cost, as well as comply with what we call the Americans with Disabilities Act, Typically an employer, you can do it at any time, but typically an employer will conduct their screening process. They will review their applications, they will conduct their interviews, then they will do their background checks and reference checks and all of those kinds of things. And once they're ready to identify an individual for hire, they may say, well, Bill Ford, we're gonna make you an offer of employment. You can start next Monday, but between now and then, we need to get have you complete a substance abuse exam. So you're not testing a handful of applicants, and you've narrowed it down to the offer and pre-start date, and that reduces a lot of your legal risks as well. But pre-employment obviously is the most common and recommended. Random testing we've already talked about a little bit in terms of random testing, the pros and cons. If you do random testing, make sure that it is truly random, computer generated. We even have clients who will put numbers in a hat and pull out numbers or names of employees and those kinds of things. Now, if you're covered under DOT regulations, Department of Transportation regulations, vehicles, operating vehicles of 26,000 or 1 or more pounds, gross vehicle weight rating, random testing is required by DOT. You have to conduct 50% of your workforce in random testing. So if you're DOT, if you have to be DOT compliant, let us know and we can help you with those specific requirements. Reasonable suspicion testing is probably the second most common, and reasonable suspicion is just exactly what it states, and that is if we reasonably believe, it doesn't have to be factual, but if we reasonably believe that someone is impaired or under the influence, we can request them to take a test. These are for your current employees. Even the public sector promotes reasonable suspicion testing. Again, reasonable suspicion is mandatory for CDL holders. Some examples of reasonable suspicion: observation of somebody's conduct, appearance, behavior, speech, odor, drowsiness, slurred speech, whatever it might be, your typical things. Maybe information regarding someone's conduct. For example, whether it's anonymous or an employee comes into your office and they say, well, we think Bill Ford is under the influence, we've heard this rumor, we think there's a problem. We believe at SESCO that that's reasonable enough to conduct a test. Rather be safe than sorry. Let's assume that you received some sort of tip, anonymous or otherwise, we didn't act upon it, and then this individual hurts himself, herself, or others in the workplace or customer. I would not want to be aware of that information and not have done anything about it. General signs, we're not going to turn you into physicians or experts in this area, but general awareness in terms of maybe temper or attitude, acting confused, not taking responsibility, pushing back, angry, withdrawing, attendance issues, all of those kinds of things are signs. And we would recommend that if you implement a policy, again, we'll talk about this in a minute, that we need to train our supervisors, make them aware of these general signs. And even sometimes you can have your local, again, doc in the box or Med 1, if you will, or urgent care center, or someone else that you know, they don't mind to come in and spend 15, 20, 30 minutes with your team about talking about substance abuse in the workplace, and most importantly, detections. But most of us are probably generally aware enough to kind of determine if we have some concern or not. What is not reasonable? maybe someone merely being associated with someone else who's known for it, unsubstantiated rumors, maybe just poor job performance. Those aren't reasonable. One other one that comes up here is, and there's a question and answer at the end of our program, is, well, even for applicants or current employees, you Google or Facebook, check a Facebook of a name, and there you are. You've got an applicant who is smoking pot on their Facebook page, or maybe you got a current employee who has mentioned something about substance abuse or at a party or whatnot. Is that reasonable? We think it is reasonable, and certainly something that you could consider in terms of conducting a test. Other types of drug testing that we recommend, one is a return to work. Let's say that an employee has been out on a workers' comp case. Maybe an employee's been out on a family and medical leave. They've been injured. Maybe they have had a surgery or other kinds of things in terms of medical issues. Any type of a return to work from a medical leave of absence, we recommend that drug testing be included. Not only a fit for duty, is this employee able to come back and perform the essential functions of their job, standing, lifting, carrying, driving, and all of those things, but also have a drug test conducted. The reason why we recommend that, it's not so much the illegal drugs, but the real problem that you all are facing and all employers across the country are facing, it's not the illegal drugs, it's the prescription medication. And it doesn't take long for an employee to be out on medical leave and all of a sudden be hooked on some type of pain medication. And that's the real challenge. So certainly consider that upon a return to work from a medical leave of absence. Follow-up testing. Let's say that you're one of those that says, okay, we want to give an employee a second chance. Well, let's talk about that second chance. What we would recommend, SESCO would recommend to you in terms of a second chance. Let's say that an employee voluntarily comes to you or fails a drug test, and we say, okay, look, here's what we expect. And the employer, you all are truly in the driver's seat at this point. What we would recommend to you is, upon a second chance, would be require the employee to participate in a substance abuse program. We even like to see, depending on the types of substances, we even like to see an inpatient program. I've had a number of clients try the outpatient program, and it just, there's the second time, the third time, the fourth time the employee fails. It's a difficult road. So you could require them to do an outpatient or some type of rehabilitation program. In addition to that, once you come back to work, if successfully released by the program, we reserve the right employee to do testing whenever we want to over the next 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, whatever you want to identify. So you may want to do follow-up testing. We would recommend that you do follow-up testing for those that you give a second or third chance to. Post-accident, strongly recommended. And as I stated earlier, your workers' comp carrier would typically give you a 5% discount on your comp cost if you implement a substance abuse policy or drug-free workplace policy, which includes post-accident. The one problem that we see post-accident is what is an accident? Is this the accountant in-house in your main office, corporate office, that trips and falls, or there's a paper cut or some other minor injury? Or is it really more of a reportable type of injury that needs to be reported to workers' comp. Typically, it's the latter. There are certain types of accidents in the workplace that you don't report that are not serious. You certainly could test an employee post-accident, but most of these are more of a serious nature. Maybe they've had to go to the emergency room, maybe there's a serious cut, whatever it might be. So consider post-accident in your policy. Drug use as an employment law issue. There are some, particularly employees, who misunderstand or misread this. Current use of drugs or alcohol is not a protected disability. The Americans with Disabilities Act will protect someone, that will consider someone to be disabled if they were, let's say, an alcoholic and successfully completed a treatment program and is no longer using. So let's say that you're interviewing Bill Ford, and we conducted some reference checks, and a reference told us, well, Bill was an alcoholic at one time. If I'm not currently an alcoholic, if I'm not currently drinking or abusing or using drugs, and I'm clean and I could pass a drug test, I am protected under ADA. So past history should not be considered in terms of substance use or alcohol abuse or alcoholism. That is protected. But if they're currently using and you test pre-employment or otherwise and they fail it, then they're not protected. Under family medical leave, let's say an employee, you have 50 or more employees and you're covered under family medical leave, and an employee voluntarily comes to you and says, look, I've got a problem. I would like to take family medical leave to receive treatment. This is considered what we call a serious medical condition under family medical leave, and they can receive up to 12 weeks either in one setting or on an intermittent leave basis to receive treatment. The most important thing that we need to understand here is, there's no exceptions to this, is that abuse of legal or prescription drugs is not protected. And that's what most employers are experiencing. Well, boss, I've got a prescription for these painkillers. Well, still yet your behavior concerns me. I want to make sure that you're fit for duty. You're under certain medication that may not allow you to perform certain duties in our job. We're going to have a fitness for duty exam, and as such, we find out that they're abusing their prescription. They're taking more than allotted or prescribed. That's an issue. Or let's say that the employee is taking their medication as directed by their physician, but still yet they're not fit for duty, meaning that they're taking some sort of medication, maybe it's a painkiller or otherwise, that makes them drowsy or sleepy and thus cannot operate a vehicle safely, or forklift or something like that. So certainly you can manage these prescriptions proactively. The other thing that we're seeing is, as we stated earlier, the states that are passing medical marijuana, just because, and it's probably going to continue across other states through in the future through elections. But just because marijuana is legal as a prescription in a state doesn't mean that an employee can show up under the influence. So we certainly can manage and, again, prevent issues or concerns, even if it's a legal or a prescription medication. As I just stated, in terms of alcohol, treating this a little bit differently, alcoholism is protected disability, but again, it doesn't excuse alcohol-related conduct in the workplace. Rules prohibiting intoxication are extremely enforceable, supported by federal and state court systems. Employee has, under the ADA, has the obligation to put you all as the employer on notice if they had a disability before there is some type of discipline. We just talked about, I sort of got ahead of myself there, but we just talked about impairment by prescription or other medication. The question comes up. In fact, I had a call this week from a client out in the Midwest. There was some concern, some suspicion about drug use and theft. What can we do as an employer? And this is something that you should include in your policy. You may not ever have to do it, but boy, if you ever need to, certainly having the right to do so is going to obviously be very helpful. So this is searches of employer property, searches of someone's desk or their locker or truck or workplace. You're free to do that. Let's take that one step further. You are free to search employees' lunch boxes, toolboxes, even their personal vehicles that are parked on company property. Those searches are all legal. Make sure you have your policy in place. The one that you may want to get help with in terms of a search, if it gets to this point, would be searching an individual. I don't think we want to get into the position of patting down employees. If you've got that type of problem, you probably want to call the local authorities anyway to investigate. But if you think someone's stealing or have drugs on or alcohol on site, you can certainly search all of their personal belongings as well as company property. So you need to consider that as well. Okay, so let's talk about the drug-free workplace program. Certainly you want a comprehensive policy. You want the policy in writing. That's very obvious. Obviously, the federal and state laws will support what you do as long as your policy is in writing and, of course, compliant, as I stated earlier. You want to make sure that you distribute the policy to all employees. One thing here, you have a couple of options. Let's say that the folks on this call do not have a drug-free workplace program or policy. There are a couple of options. One is, I wouldn't recommend this, but we'll receive a client call and they say, well, Bill, we don't have a drug-free workplace policy, but I smell alcohol on John Doe's breath and I want to have him tested. They could literally, we could help them with a policy. They could develop a policy that morning and then turn around immediately and go to that employee and say, employee, here's our policy on drug-free workplace or substance abuse. We want you to go get a test. So you could literally implement a policy immediately and address concerns as needed, but I wouldn't wait for a concern to come up to implement a policy is what I'm saying. But there's no such time frame that you have to allow except for a few states that restrict the implementation. The other possibility might be, okay, employees, here's our new policy. We're going to implement this policy May 1st. This is going to give you 30 days. You can either come to us voluntarily. If you come to us voluntarily and let us know if you have a problem, we'll work with you. Or we just want to let you know that in 30 days we're going to start testing. So therefore, if you have a problem or if you're a social user, you better quit now. So some employers feel as if they need to give employees a heads-up notice to maybe clean up their system or change their habits or whatnot. So that's up to you in terms of how you want to implement it. But certainly communicating the policy to employees, even through an employee handbook, or we've even seen some employers submit the policy to employees, have each policy signed off by each individual employee so that there's no question about what our policy talks about. But other reasons there, obviously, for reducing your policy to writing. Some basic elements. Most of this we've already covered, but part of this policy is your goals, your vision, your reasons, your communication to your employees as well as the community on that we are a drug-free workplace. What do we define as substance abuse? That's a fairly technical definition. That doesn't change a whole lot, but you'll want to include that. What is substance abuse? Most importantly, what substance abuse is also abuse of legal and prescription medication. Many of the policies that we review for clients across the country don't address the legal or prescription medication. What employees' behaviors are expected, meaning they may refuse to take a test. Well, if they refuse to take a test, we're automatically going to consider it to be a positive. If an employee is not using, they should feel free to prove that to us. As we talked about earlier, what employee or what job class is covered by the policy. Of course, what type of testing, pre-employment, post-accident, reasonable suspicion. We recommend all of those. The one question would be the random, whether or not you want to implement a random program unless it's CDL required. In terms of developing a policy, you can Google. There's lots of information out there, but one of the things that we do recommend, again, contact us or someone else to help you with it. Federal and state courts greatly support these programs as long as it's compliant. Dissemination and training, pretty straightforward, meaning we want to educate managers. Managers, above all else, need to understand the policy. They need to be aware of legally sensitive areas, meaning that managers and supervisors are, quote, legal agents of the organization, just as under harassment, sex harassment, race harassment rules and regulations. These individuals, managers and supervisors, can be held personally liable equally as the company, same as here. So if they are aware, if they suspect and they don't notify the owner or manager above or do something about it, then they're putting themselves in jeopardy as well. Recognizing potential issues, how to properly document, maybe it's an accident, how do we document an accident, how do we document post-accident testing, all of those kinds of things. Maybe even how to respond to a workplace crisis, such as serious injury or whatnot regarding and around substance use. Employee training, and that's part of the implementation of the policy. While we're having this policy, what are some key aspects? Open door complaint procedure, seeking assistance voluntarily. We want those kinds of things. Employees be aware of these things. One final decision, and this will be made with your local provider. Most physician offices, medical doc in the boxes, urgent cares, etc., do these types of tests. They can advise you on the cost, of course, and what type of test you want to implement. Typically, there's two types of tests. One is the 5-panel that covers those 5 drugs or types of drugs. Obviously, it's least expensive. And then you can get into a 10-panel. More and more, due to the masks that I've mentioned earlier that folks can get on the internet or other ways to prevent a positive test, we like to see the 10-panel. We've even seen some 12-panel testing, but again, that needs to be discussed with your provider, and you need to look at the cost and the pros and cons. But the more you can test for, obviously, the better. As I've talked about throughout, can an applicant employee beat a drug test? The answer is yes. They can purchase synthetic urine. There's agents to break up detectable amounts in urine. There's things that they can do, but we feel with an effective policy as well as training managers and doing the other things that you need to do, you can have a good drug-free workplace program in general. We've covered these technical considerations. And this may create some questions as we're working through, but these are some client questions that we've surveyed our staff here recently preparing for this program. hey, consulting legal staff, what are some of the questions that you've received? And these are some actual questions that we've received. I've received an anonymous tip that a certain employee is using drugs. Can I test that individual? Yes, if you think it's in any way credible, absolutely. We think that's reasonable suspicion. I saw a picture of an employee drinking and smoking pot on Facebook. Can I test them? Absolutely. I think that's reasonable suspicion. Is it worth the cost of conducting pre-employment drug testing? Absolutely. If I suspect someone is under the influence at work or post a workplace injury, should I personally drive them to the medical facility to conduct the test? We think so, or call a cab or otherwise. If we think someone is under the influence, the last thing we want to do then is put them in their own vehicle to drive to a facility. So that's going to be part of your policy or your procedures that you want to talk about, is what happens if we detect someone and they're under the influence and we have some concern. If someone is driving a company vehicle, has an accident, should I test them? Yes, and many times you're required, particularly under DOT, CDL requirements. If someone has an accident, you're required to test them. The other thing there, as a footnote, it dawned on me, those that operate in most, and this is most within the PHCC contractors, you have company vehicles, is you may want to test annually all employees who are required to drive a company vehicle. You may also want to conduct a report of the individual's driving record on an annual basis. Your insurance carrier likes to see these types of monitors at least annually, and you'll probably reduce some cost on your auto insurance, etc. If the individual tests positive, could I be liable for the accident, injury, or even death? Potentially. You know, these attorneys out there, they're going to pursue where the money is. And certainly if we knew or should have known that somebody was under the influence, we have some liability there, certainly. If an employee provides me a copy or proof of prescriptions, do I have to allow them to work? No, you don't. You need to have a fitness for duty, and if they're taking their medication within prescribed limitations and are also fit under the prescription, even if taken as prescribed, you're okay in managing that piece. If I use temporary employees to a third-party agency, am I liable for their illegal use? Yes, although your temp services will tell you that they take all the risks, they don't. You're a co-employer and you're going to be equally liable for certain issues. Subsequent to positive drug tests, can I require an employee to complete an employee assistance rehabilitation program? We talked about that, and yes, if you're going to give a chance to someone, certainly I would require it. Medical marijuana is legal in our state. Can I still restrict its use in the workplace? Yes, just because it's legal doesn't mean the employee is fit for duty. An employee's wife called for her husband's absence, stating that he had been arrested for DUI. What should we do at this point? Or you may see, more commonly, you would see someone in the newspaper or on the news, someone's been arrested, or maybe we hear about it through employees. First thing you want to do is suspend the employee pending whether or not they're actually convicted, and allow the police, the sheriff's office, the authorities to deal with this through their end. We don't want to immediately terminate because they may not be convicted. So we need to allow the process to unfold, but you can certainly suspend the employee with or without pay. An employee tested positive and is adamant that the test was wrong, and I literally had this about 3 weeks ago with a client. The employee was adamant that the test was wrong and that they've never used the drugs that they tested for. What should I do at this point? If you choose, and these labs, these doc in the boxes, these urgent cares, they all know and understand the rules and regulations about tests. If the employee goes to one of those facilities and they test positive, there's a whole certain process where these positive drug tests are sent off and retested. And at this point, that would be between the employee or applicant and that medical provider. If they tell us it's a positive test and the individual is under the influence, legal influence, which is all articulated and defined, then that's all we have to do. We're not required to rescind them or challenge the testing facility or anything else because the testing process is so ironclad.